Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you here tonight. My name is George Scala. I teach in the English department. I've been working with Jennifer Rudolph from the One Book, One College committee this semester, and we're excited to have Dr. Divakaruni with us this evening. Before we begin, we would like to recognize the winners of our One Book, One College essay contest. In first place, Shalana Downey for her essay, Targeted Realization. Second place is Christine Jabor for Culture Shock. And in third place, we have Bettina McClymont for Yellow Dress. Are any of y'all winners in the audience tonight? Yeah, stand up, please. And our three honorable mentions, Romello Valentine for Untitled Poem, Dwight Nevins for I Am a Traveler, and Kennedy O'Toole for Holding Your Breath. It's my pleasure to turn the microphone over to our president, Dr. Charles Wall.
Good evening. So glad everyone's here tonight for what is one of our special events during the academic year, our One College, One Book event. And this evening is going to be, I can already tell, particularly special. So thanks for being here, and thanks some of you for being part of programs that have already occurred on the Brockton campus and will be occurring at Canton, Brockton and Canton tomorrow. So without further comments, our guest speaker is well known to everyone in this room through her at least one book that we've been all looking at, One Amazing Thing. Chitra Divakaruni is an award-winning and best-selling author, poet, activist, and teacher of writing. The work has been published, as many of you know, in over 50 magazines, including the Atlantic Monthly and the New Yorker, and her writing has been included in over 50 anthologies, including the Best American Short Stories and the O. Henry Prize Stories and the Pushcart Prize Anthology. So we have, not in the printed version now, we have quite the author here, quite the demonstration of creative imagination. And I can tell you, I'm just so looking forward to what she has to say. Her work's been translated to 29 languages. She's born in Kolkata, India, came to the United States for her graduate studies, receiving a master's degree in English from Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio, and a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley. She teaches in the nationally ranked creative writing program at the University of Houston, where she is the Betty and Jean McDavid Professor of Creative Writing. She serves on a number of boards that help particularly women who are in an abusive or domestic violence situation. Relating to a number of people in this room, to earn money for her education, she has held many odd jobs, so she held many odd jobs, I should say, including babysitting, selling merchandise in an Indian boutique, slicing bread in a bakery, and washing instruments in a science lab. We have that in common, by the way. I did that too. My friends in the humanities, believe it or not. At Berkeley, she lived in the International House and worked in the dining hall. She briefly lived in Illinois and Ohio, but spent most of her life in Northern California, which she often writes about. She currently lives in Houston, Texas, with her husband and has two sons who are in college. So, with great pleasure, pride, and thanks to the One College, One Book committee for another wonderful job, I present to you Chitra Divakaruni.
Well, the organizers did ask me to stand behind the podium, but I said then you wouldn't be able to see me, and more important, you wouldn't be able to see and admire my sari. So first of all, I want to thank the college for choosing my book and for inviting me here. I've been meeting with students all day, and it has been a wonderful experience. it's really special to see how the students are connecting to the book, and I look forward to seeing the many assignments and writing that's going to come out of this. So you were hearing a little bit about, but people often ask me, what is a writer's life like as you're becoming a writer? So you were hearing about my many jobs that I held, but you didn't hear about my favorite and possibly most dramatic job that I had. Well, maybe not so dramatic, but in my mind it was, which was when I was at the University of California at Berkeley, and I was working in the dining hall, as you heard. Now, we would get different kinds of things to do, all right? So on the days when our supervisor was not pleased with me, I would be sent to the dish room. So I had to, get all the dishes, put them in the dishwasher. On other days, I would be serving, which was fine. I didn't mind that. But my favorite thing to do was to be in the dessert room, where we got to cut up the dessert. Right? They'd have these big trays of desserts, like big baking trays filled with cake, etc. But my favorite one was this big trays of Jell-O. They would make this Jell-O, all right? So I lived in a very traditional household in Kolkata, and I had not seen Jell-O before I came to America. I was quite fascinated by this substance. And I loved the way it jiggled and wobbled. When nobody was looking, I would take the tray of Jell-O and give it a nice big shake and watch it wobble. Well, one day I shook the Jell-O too much, and it cracked across the middle, and now we had two uneven pieces of Jell-O. And my supervisor came in right at that moment, and that was the last time I worked in the dining hall, in the Jell-O section. Well, many years later, the university invited me back to be Alumna of the Year at International House, where I had worked in the dining hall. And then they gave me a beautiful pin, and when I did my acceptance speech, and then they gave me a little bag that was wrapped up. And when I opened it, yes, 5 pounds of Jell-O powder. Anyway, so those are the adventures that a writer goes through. Now, people always want to know, how do I get ideas for my stories? And I get ideas for my stories in different places, in different ways. But I thought I would share with you how I got the idea for One Amazing Thing, which was a little different. Usually, wherever I go, I carry a writer's notebook, or at least some paper and a pen, so I can write down ideas if they come to me, because I'm always looking for ideas. But on the day that I got the idea for One Amazing Thing, I wasn't thinking about ideas, I wasn't thinking about writing, I was basically thinking about saving my life and the lives of my family, because it was a dangerous day. It was a day when a major hurricane was coming right at Houston. This was in 2005. This was Hurricane Rita. It was just a few weeks after Katrina had devastated New Orleans. So we all knew what a hurricane could do. And the organizers, they decided to evacuate Houston. So here we were, a city of 4+ million people, all being evacuated all at once. And you can imagine the chaos, right? So here we were on Interstate 10. We got on Interstate 10 with an idea of going to San Antonio, which is about 3 hours away. Got on the interstate around 7 in the evening, and at 2 a.m., we were still on the interstate. We'd only moved a few exits. It's completely impacted. We could hear on our radios the hurricanes coming closer and closer. And everyone is starting to panic. Now it's dark. Here we are stuck with all of these strangers. And of course, we don't want any of these strangers with us. We're like, if you weren't here, I would be in San Antonio by now. And cars started overheating, engines started overheating, people started running out of gas, tempers started overheating. It was so hot, people just spilled out of the cars onto the freeway, and there was this mass of people in the dark, just being very unhappy and very scared. And as you can imagine, in a situation like that, fights began to break out and arguments, and it was quite scary. And of course, inside our own car, we had our own bad behavior going, my husband and I. I won't get into that. Just letting you know that, it's not like I was above all of it. But as I was watching all these people getting into like fist fights and shouting matches, I also noticed that not everybody was behaving like this. Some people were like examples of grace under pressure. They were going through the crowd, trying to calm people down. They were trying to share water and food with the elderly and small children, and they were just trying to make things better. And that's when the writer part of my brain clicked on, and I thought, how interesting. It's all the same situation, we're all stuck in the same place. Some of us are falling apart, and some of us are rising to like the best part of themselves. How interesting, and why does that happen? And I thought to myself, well, if Hurricane Rita doesn't come and wipe us all out, I'm going to write a book about it. And that book became one amazing thing. And because I'm a fiction writer, as I wrote the book, it changed. It changed in its nature, although the theme was still the same. So the crisis is no longer a hurricane. It's not a hurricane, it's an earthquake. The locale is no longer a dark freeway in Texas. It's a city in America that's unnamed. It's the basement of a high-rise building. It's an Indian visa office. And there's still a group of strangers. These are people who have all gone to the Indian visa office because for many different reasons, they want to go to India. And as they're waiting there, the earthquake hits. It's a huge earthquake, and their plans are changed, perhaps forever. Right? So, but the theme of the book, the theme is still very similar. What do we do when we're in a situation where we think our lives are in danger? What happens when we're in that kind of situation and not with our loved and trusted ones, but with a room full of strangers in the dark? Strangers who are very different from us in age, in religion, in socioeconomic grouping, and just people that we think have nothing in common with us. So that's kind of what we have in the beginning of One Amazing Thing. And I thought I will read to you a little bit from the beginning, just before the earthquake strikes. As I told you, there are many characters in this book. And so one of the challenges as I was writing it was to be in the consciousness of all these different people. So this part is from the point of view of Uma, who was a graduate student and who was actually there to get a visa because her parents that lived here for many years had now gone back and retired in India, which we are beginning to see some instances of in our community. And Uma has a boyfriend, his name is Ramon, and she hasn't told Ramon where she's going to be for reasons that become clear later in the book. Yes, we have an Uma in the audience, I can tell. All right, so we won't ask about any boyfriends named Ramon that you might have. Right, so but now she thinks that she's going to call Ramon and tell him where she is, but she can't get reception because she's in the basement of this building. So she's walking around trying to get reception. Phone to her ear, Uma took a few steps forward. It felt good to stretch her legs. She watched as the woman emerged from Mr. Mangalam's office, shaking out the creases of her sari, looking like she had bitten into something sour. And as you read the book later, you'll find out who this woman is. The phone gave a small burp against her ear, but before she could check if it was working, a rumble rose through the floor. It was as though a giant had placed his mouth against the building's foundation and roared. The floor buckled, throwing Uma to the ground. The giant took the building in both his hands and shook it. A chair flew across the room toward Uma. She raised her left arm to shield herself. The chair crashed into her wrist, and a pain worse than anything she had known surged through her arm. People were screaming. Feet ran by her, then ran back again. She tried to wedge herself beneath one of the chairs, as she had been taught long ago in grade school, but only her head and shoulders would fit. The cell phone was still in her other hand, pressed against her ear. Was that Ramon's voice, asking her to leave a message? Or was it just her need to hear him? Above her, the ceiling collapsed in an explosion of plaster. Beams broke apart with the sound of gigantic bones snapping. A light fixture shattered. For a moment, before the electricity failed, she saw the glowing filaments of the naked bulb. Rubble fell through the blackness, burying her legs. Her arm was on fire. She cradled it against her chest. A useless gesture, and she would probably die in the next minutes. Was that the sound of running water? Was the basement they were in flooding? She thought she heard a beep, the machine ready to record her voice. Ramon, she cried, her mouth full of dust. She thought of his long, meticulous fingers, how they could fix anything she broke. She thought of the small red moles on his chest, just above the left nipple. She wanted to say something important and consoling, something for him to remember her by, but she could think of nothing. And then her phone went dead. So as a writer, my hope is that readers, as they're going through a book, will be thinking about the situation in which the characters are, where the characters find themselves, and that readers will think about what they might do in such a situation. So my hope is that as you read or hear this situation, you will think for a moment, if you were in a situation where there was only one phone call you could make, who would you make it to? And if there was only time to say one thing to them, what message would you leave? Well, Uma's situation is not a good one, as she finds out, as all of these 9 people find out over the next few hours. They can't get out. They try really hard to get out, but parts of the building begin to collapse, and they realize that they can't get through the rubble, and that every time they try, more is collapsing, so they have to kind of stay put and not even really move around so much. And water is indeed rising. There's no electricity, there's no phones, there's no cell phones. They think they smell gas. It's a bad situation. They realize they may not ever get out of there. And they begin to panic. And in their panic, because there's nothing else to do, they turn on each other. And in fact, there's a major fight, after which even more of the ceiling begins to come down. And they realize that this is very self-destructive. And Uma says to the group, she says, we're just going to destroy ourselves. We can't do this. We have to think of something better to spend our time. Let us tell each other a story out of our lives. something we've never told anyone, something that has made us who we are today. One story. Of course, immediately everybody thinks it's a terrible idea. They're like, we're about to die and you want us to tell you a story. And one of them, Mrs. Pritchett, says, I don't even have a story to tell. Nothing that special has ever happened to me. And Uma says, I don't believe that. She says, I believe in everyone's life there is at least one amazing thing. Now, so I'm writing this book, I'm going along, I'm typing, and I type this part, and this feeling just goes through me. You know, when I write, and possibly this might be true for other writers, we are also discovering the story as we are writing it. And when I wrote this part, I was like, this is really important. I think this is what's at the heart of this book. One amazing thing that everyone has in their life. And it struck me that I believe that too. I believe that all of us have lives that have at least one amazing thing. Sometimes we don't think about it because, you know, we're so busy living our everyday lives, you know, paying our bills, going to school, whatever it is that we do, that we lose sight of these important moments. Sometimes we forget them, sometimes we never recognize them. So one of my hopes is, and I'm very happy to find that already on this campus people are doing this, one of my hopes is that as people read this book, they will start thinking about their one amazing thing, their special story of what has made them who they are today, their special moment that has taught them something really important. So after some time, one by one, people start telling these stories. And these are, some of them are funny stories, some of them are painful stories, but they're all stories that really affected these lives. So I thought I will read to you a little bit from one of those stories. This is a story, this is one of my favorite stories. Okay, so I have to tell you, one of the reasons I like this story is because of the research I had to do for this story. This story, as you will see, is set in a beauty salon in India. So of course, you know, I went to India to visit my mother. I was already in the middle of this book, and I was like, have to do the research. So my husband was in the United States. He'd call me. He'd say, so where did you go today? And I'd say, I went to a beauty salon. And he would say, again? Didn't you just go to one last week? And I would say, research. So anyway, I became very fond of the beauty salon in this chapter. So the woman who's telling this story, her name is Malati. She's one of the people who works in the visa office. So there are two people who work in the visa office who are also trapped here. And the only thing that I really need to explain is that she comes from a fairly small town. It's not like one of the major metropolises, and she comes from a very conservative family. When I failed 10th grade for the second time, my parents figured it was no use wasting more money on my school fees and decided to marry me off. Okay, I have to pause here and say, please feel free to laugh. Sometimes, you know, when you're at a book reading, everyone is very serious. This is a literary event. We must not show any teeth. Okay, but I give you permission. In fact, whenever I think you should laugh, I'll raise it. All right. I'm going to start again. When I failed 10th grade for the second time, this is a tragedy. You're not supposed to be laughing at this part. You are very cruel. I can tell this is a cruel audience. When I failed 10th grade for the second time, my parents figured it was no use wasting more money on my school fees and decided to marry me off. I see this young man laughing. How would you feel if your parents decided to marry you? No, just kidding. I had no objections. It was not as though I had anything else to do. Having navigated their way through the weddings of 2 daughters already, my parents knew that the local matchmaker would ask for a photograph. If they could provide her with one in which I looked better than normal, my chances of finding a husband and theirs of negotiating a smaller dowry would be highly improved. Though in general thrifty and suspicious, they knew the importance of a well-chosen investment. That is how I ended up at Miss Lola's Lovely Ladies Salon, the premier beauty shop in Coimbatore. You like that name? I kind of like that name myself. My mother had been to Lovely Ladies only twice, but Miss Lola knew her right away. The bridal photo special, again? She asked. When my mother nodded, Miss Lola looked me up and down and pronounced that I would require more work than my sisters. My mother gave a sigh but did not disagree, and the two of them fell to bargaining about the price of my beautification. When they had reached an agreement, Miss Lola gave a volley of staccato instructions to the pink uniformed girls who worked for her, ending with bridal special, silver level with hair oil. There is a subtext about hair oil and concepts of traditional Indian beauty, but you'll have to ask one of the Indian ladies in the audience. I remember I did, and maybe some of you did. I had many battles with my mother as I was growing up because she wanted to put hair oil in my hair and I did not. Did that happen to any of you? Yes. 2 girls whisked me to an inner sanctum filled with elegant women undergoing the painful process of improving upon nature. I was settled into a reclining chair and shrouded in cotton sheets. And it was here, in this moist, air-conditioned room, decorated totally in shades of pink, Lola's favorite color, and fragrant with astonishing and exotic substances which my naive nose was incapable of identifying, that I saw, as though illuminated by lightning, the path of my future. Now, all this time, Malti knew that she didn't have many options. She could become maybe a school teacher, but she wasn't, that wasn't exciting to her. And that was about it, or she could get married. But now she has suddenly another idea. Lola's girls, with their perfectly arched eyebrows, glowing skin, and pretty faces hanging over me like radiant moons, were different from any of the women I knew, as they plucked and exfoliated and massaged oil and pinched blackheads and slathered my cheeks with fair and lovely cream. You know that, ladies? Yes. Another subtext I'll have to tell you later, fair and lovely. Clucking soothingly when I yelped and assuring me that the end result would be worth it, I felt a strange kinship with them. They camouflaged me with sufficient foundation, face powder, kohl, lipstick, blush, and Vatika pure coconut hair oil to pass as one of Lola's lovely ladies. They attached a glistening bindi to my forehead and clipped fake diamond earrings to my ears. They pinned a sequined sari, kept in the salon for this very purpose, to my upper body, since that was all the photo would show, to manufacture curves where none had existed before. One of them ran to fetch Lola's nephew, who operated the photography business next door, while the others demonstrated facial expressions guaranteed to delight mothers-in-law, causing me to burst into laughter, something I never did in the presence of strangers. But they were no longer strangers. The next morning, when my mother armed me with a parasol to protect my newly lightened skin and dispatched me to the bazaar to buy bitter gourd, I used the money instead to rent an auto rickshaw. Half an hour later, I was at Lola's, begging her to let me work for her. Lola must have seen something. Perhaps a glint of determination in my eyes reminded her of her own younger self. Although she had a room full of clients, she took the time to listen to my pleas. When I finished, she asked, "What's the matter? You don't want to be a bride?" To which I answered, "I'd rather be a bride maker." Lola, who had been divorced twice and thus knew what was what, said, "Smart thinking." And just like that, although she hadn't really needed another employee, I became one of Lola's girls. And as you know, things are going to become very adventurous and very complicated for Malati, because not only will she meet the richest, the most powerful, and the nastiest women, the gossips of Coimbatore, one of them will take a great liking to her, and this is the worst of the worst. And this woman, this very rich and powerful woman, has a son, only son, apple of his mother's eye. He's been studying abroad in America. He comes back to Coimbatore. His head is filled with all kinds of newfangled ideas about breaking down class barriers, and he's going to fall in love with the most unsuitable woman. Who is she? Don't tell if you know. I'm going to preserve that suspense, and people will have to read the book to find out. Thank you. Okay, so now for a few easy questions for me so that I can give you brilliant answers. Yes?
When we were initially in contact, you said something about librarians.
Say that again?
When we were in initial contact, you said something about librarians being your favorite
Oh,
people.
she wants a compliment? Oh, I got it. Yes? Right, okay. So the question is, did I ever say that librarians were my favorite people? Now, tell me again, what is it that you do? Yes, she is a wonderful librarian here at this college. And yes, because librarians, I hold librarians in great fondness and esteem, because a librarian really very much changed my life around. When I was here, when I first came to America, the night I arrived in America, my father lost his job. And all of a sudden, there was no money for me to go to college. So I had to start working at all kinds of odd jobs. And I remember my first job was a babysitting job. I was not trained to do anything. In India, I had never worked, because that's just how the system is. People just go to school until they get a degree that will then give them a profession. So I came here and I was doing a babysitting job, and this child was, I remember him so well. He was the bane of my existence, because yes, he would not listen to anything I said. He was just a toddler, and I guess I wasn't very good at handling children. And yes, I was seriously at this point thinking of going back to India, thanks to this child. But, and also because it seemed like I would never get enough money together to go to college. And you know, all the dreams that I had come with, they just seemed to be disappearing. And one night I was living in Chicago at this time. I was living with relatives when I was working and trying to save money. And so this was Chicago, and it was so very cold, and I'd come from India. I wasn't used to the cold, and one day I was coming back on the bus, and the bus broke down. And I said, okay, this is it. Tomorrow I'm going to look into going back to India. This is just not going to work. And then everyone had to get off the bus and wait for the next bus. It was bitter cold, and I saw across from me a library. And I said, it's really cold, I'm gonna go wait inside the library. And I walked into the library, and it struck me that since I'd come to America, I hadn't had time to read a single book. And I walked in and I asked the librarian, what do I have to do to borrow a book? How much is it going to cost? And she said, if you have ID, I can give you a card right now, and you can borrow as many books as you want. And that librarian just became such a friend to me. And she asked me what kinds of books I was interested in, what I wanted to do, what I was doing in America. And I told her that I was wanting to go to college, but I didn't think it would happen. And she just gave me so much encouragement. I think she really turned my life around, and she gave me hope that I could do it. And she gave me wonderful books of American literature that I hadn't read. And the first book she gave me was The Great Gatsby. And that made a big difference. It made a big difference. I felt that, okay, the American dream, I can have that too. So that's why I'm so fond of librarians. But there are moments when people enter our lives and they turn our lives around. And I'm always going to be grateful to her for that. Another question? Yes? Uma, right?
In the writing of this book, did you figure out what your amazing thing was?
Yes? The question is, do I have an amazing story, and did I figure it out while I was writing? Yes, I did. In fact, my amazing story happened when one year, a few years back, quite a few years back, but after I had moved here and finished my studies and I was already working, I went back to India for a pilgrimage trip. And I went to a pilgrimage up in the Himalayas, up in those highest mountains of the world up in the north. And this was a pilgrimage to a shrine called Amarnath, which is a very difficult shrine. To go 4 days on the glacier to get there, and it takes 2 days to come back. And I got there, and you have to go with a group. And one of the things that you have to promise in the beginning of the journey is that you will not stop for anyone. Everyone's on their own. You go with a group, but everyone's responsible for themselves. You won't stop for anyone, and you won't ask anyone to stop for you if you get delayed. And the way this pilgrimage works is there are tents, and they're set so far apart, and you're supposed to get from one to the other by the end of the day, and if you don't, it's really like wilderness over there. There are no lights, there are no major paths, there's just how the pilgrims go. So it's a difficult pilgrimage. So everything's going well. I get to the shrine of Amarnath with my group. I'm coming down, and a big rainstorm starts. This is very bad because then all the paths get washed away, and glaciers, it's all on the glaciers, so cracks begin to open up in the glaciers. And where there were paths, these rushing rivers begin to start flowing, and it's very dangerous. And it was so difficult. Every time I would step in this slush, my feet would sink like up to my knees, and I was exhausted. And my group went ahead. I thought I would just rest for a few minutes. And my group went ahead, and then by the time I could pull myself up, there was no one in sight. I was like, okay, but I know how to go. I know where the roads are, more or less. I can get there. I can get there by night to the tents. And I'm going. It's getting towards evening, and I turn a corner, and this is a part where the entire road has been washed away. There's this big river, and there are big cracks, chasms in the glaciers. And I'm like, I just can't get across this. If I try, I'm going to fall in the river and get washed away, or I'm going to fall into the chasm, and that's it. So I'm sitting there, and I'm crying. I'm remembering that my husband told me not to go on this trip. I'm like, honey, I should have listened to you. Anyway, so I'm crying and I'm praying, and I'm like, okay, this is it. I'm going to die on the mountainside, because if you're stuck out there for a whole night in that freezing weather, you're dead. And then a man comes around the bend just the way I had been coming. And I don't know him, but there are many pilgrims, each with their own groups, so that's not unusual. And he says, "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" And he's quite old, this man. And I say, I point to the raging river, and I say, I kind of look at him like, "Old man, you should be crying too by this point. We're both going to die now." And he's like, "Don't lose heart. I think I can jump across." And I look at him and I look at the river, and I don't think this is going to happen. But he says, "Come on." And he says, and he has a long pilgrim staff. "I'm going to jump across. I'm going to hand you my staff. You hold it, you jump, and I'll pull you at the same time, and I think you can jump across." Well, I don't believe this. He jumps across, though, and he hands me his staff, and somehow I manage to grab it and jump across, and I almost fall, but I hold on, and he pulls me out, and we're on the other side, and now it's getting really dark, so he says, "Come on, let's get to the tents quickly before it's too dark to see our path at all." And then I say to him, "But you're not in my group. I didn't see you in our tents." And he says, "No, I'm just around the mountain, around the bend of the mountain." So I go to my group, and everybody's very worried by now, and I go and I tell them, and he goes on to his group. So I tell them what happens, and they say, "You must really go back tomorrow early morning and offer him a gift to show, because he really did save your life, to show your thanks." So I say, and that's absolutely true. I get up very early next morning before the tents are broken down, and I go around the mountain, and there's no other group there. And that man is nowhere, and I never saw him again. And who was he? I don't know. So that is my one amazing story. Thank you. Thank you. And I think the way it changed my life is it really made me believe in miracles. It also made me believe that help comes to us from the most unexpected sources. And it really made me think, all right, if I'm in a situation which looks really bad and I've done my best, then I shouldn't worry so much. I should just trust and see what happens. And so that's how this incident changed. Okay, maybe one or two more questions? Yes? Yes?
I would like to know exactly if marriage in India, if a programming marriage or if the partners taking decisions like this.
Okay, the question is about marriage in India. Are most marriages arranged, or does the man and the woman, can they make a decision? Things are changing very fast in India, and I would say, especially in the urban centers, there are many marriages where the man and the woman will make their own decision. In the rural areas or in the smaller cities, it's still common to have arranged marriages. Now, arranged marriages themselves have changed their nature. Like when my mother or my grandmother got married, it was totally decided by the families. But now often a family will introduce someone to a young man or a young woman and see if they like each other and they get along, and then they can decide yes or no. And if they say no, then the family will look for someone else. So it's an old tradition that continues, but that is now being mixed with newer ways of doing things, and also the arranged marriage itself is changing its nature. And what's interesting though, and this is kind of just an interesting phenomenon, is that in this country, young people who are growing up are sometimes deciding to have arranged marriages, even though, and these are people in the Indian American community, even though they've grown up here and they said we have the choice to find their own mates, they often will want their families to be involved in the process. And I think they just realize that sometimes parents know them very well, and as long as it's a process that they can veto, like if they introduce them to someone and they don't like it, they can say, no, not this person, they realize it's kind of an advantage to have your mom out there, or your dad out there searching for a suitable mate for you. So when I was before I got married, And when had come to the US, I was very against arranged marriages. In fact, I met my husband, who's Indian. I met him when I was going to college. But now that I have 2 grown sons, yeah, it seems like not so bad, right? Not so bad. Thank you for that question. Yes?
Do you write every day, or do you write certain hours, or wait for inspiration, or just carry on?
Yes. The question is, do I write every day? Do I write for certain hours? Do I wait for inspiration? What is my writing process? I try to write every day that I don't go in to teach. So when I go in to teach, that's a full day of teaching. But every day that I'm at home, after I get up, and when my children were at home, when they go to school is when I'd go to my writing desk and I'd write for several hours. And that is what works for me. It's not like every day I get a lot of writing done. Some days I'm stuck, some days I'm just taking notes, some days I'm revising. But I try to set aside some time for myself to write. Because if I waited for inspiration, I don't know when that would come next. Actually, yes? No, I type into my computer. Yes, that's what I do because that's what I've become used to now, so that's much easier. And also revision, as all of you know, as students and as administrators as well, the revision becomes a lot easier when you're on the computer. So, but the downside of the computer is the internet, because it's such a temptation. And I start with the best of intentions to I need to do research, I need to look up something. And then, by some kind of evil magic, I'm on my Facebook page. How does this happen? And 2 hours have gone by. How does that happen? Yes? One amazing thing, it took me probably about 2 years. Because first I was doing research. I had to research the backgrounds of various characters. I had to research earthquakes. I had to research some historic events. So that research took some time, and then I wrote it. Then I sent it to my editor at the publishing house, and she gave me comments about things she didn't like. That was unfair, I thought. I decided she would not be my friend anymore. So it took me about 2 weeks to get over that, and then I started revising, and I have to admit the revisions, her questions were good questions, and her comments were good questions. They did help to make the book better, so yes, students, much as we hate revision, it is good for us. It's like exercise, okay? Yes, it's like exercise and oatmeal, yes. That's a good question. What advice would I give to college students who are interested in writing? First of all, I would say read a lot. Read really good literature. Read the kind of book you want to write, because you will learn so much from that kind of book. You'll see what the successful writers are doing. You'll see what the best writers are doing. And as you read other things, you'll start getting ideas of your own. You'll apply it to your own life, your own situation, your own interests, and you'll see that reading, there's something quite magical about reading. If you're reading with that intention, is your own ideas begin to come up. So that's the first thing I would say is read a lot, and read like a writer. This is what I tell my students all the time. Buy your own copy of the book and read with a pen or pencil in your hand, so you can mark things up. You can write things like really good description, great dialogue, look how complex the motivation is. So you can go back then and see the techniques that are being used. And that's how a book teaches you things. So you learn by reading. And the other thing is, become aware of the story you're writing. What do you know? What really excites you? That's your story. What do you really care about? That's your story. And if you have an idea that you really care about, and you know how to write it in a way that's original, I think you've got a winner there. It is a lot of work. It might take you time, but you know, it's just like if you want to become a great singer, or you want to become a great ball player, or you know, any field that you really want to get good in, you have to give it the time, the effort, the energy. Yes. I saw your hand first.
I know you said that you had to do research about the characters, but how did you originally come up with the characters?
How did I originate? The question is, how did I originally come up with the characters? Okay. And this is a very mysterious part of writing. I'm not sure I have a good answer for that. But so I got this idea that after my own experience with the hurricane, that I wanted to write about characters in a crisis. And I chose an earthquake because I'd lived in California and I had experienced earthquakes. I knew how scary they could be and that they would also force people to be stuck in one place without being able to get out. And then I sat down with my notebook and I said to myself, well, who's going to be here? And I sat and I waited until I started getting some mental pictures about these people. And the only thing I knew about these characters in One Amazing Thing is that they needed to be really different from each other, because that ups the stakes, right? If we're stuck somewhere with people we know and love and they're just like us, it's much less stressful, right? But these are strangers. They have to be different. They have to look dangerous. They have to, you know, they have to be people that in the beginning of the novel, the characters didn't like, right? Even Malti, whose story I read out to you, in the beginning, nobody likes her because she sent them, she's the office worker in the visa office, and she sent them all a note that said, your appointment is at 9:30 in the morning. So they've all been waiting since morning. They all hate her, right? But the hope is that when we hear her story, we begin to feel differently about her. So I really had to just sit and allow the imagination to work. And that is a mysterious process. I can't really explain how that happens. I'm just thankful every time it happens. But I do know this, if you write regularly, it kind of primes the imagination. And the imagination just works better. I guess it's your imagination muscle. If you work it every day, it gets stronger. Yes?
I've often heard that authors have little to say about what the title of their book is, and I'm wondering if One Amazing Thing was your choice or your publisher's choice?
The question is, was One Amazing Thing my choice or my publisher's choice? And you said that writers often don't have much of a say. One Amazing Thing was my choice because I typed in those words and then I knew that that's what this book is about. And so right away, it was very clear. And that was, you know, a real gift because I knew it right then that this is what the rest of the book is going to be, that people are going to tell their one amazing stories. And so everything became very clear when I got to that point of the book. So, and my agent loved the title, my publisher loved the title, and, you know, it was just happy families all the way. However, this is not always the case. In fact, right now, we're kind of locked in a death struggle because I'm writing my collection of short stories, and I think I have a wonderful title, and they think it's not so good. And I know I'm right, I know they're wrong. However, we shall see what happens. And I'm not going to tell you what they want. Oh, I'll tell you. All right. Okay, so, right. And then when the book comes out, you'll know who won. You know? But sometimes, you know, when I'm having these struggles, and we also have struggles about, like, covers. Covers is a sore point, right? I have these wonderful artistic ideas about covers, and they have ideas for covers that will sell. And so, no. But when I really run into trouble, I go to my Facebook page and I take a vote, and I write something like, this is the cover my publisher wants, and this is the cover I love. Which cover would you prefer? Right. And after 5,000 people say, I like this cover, the publisher usually listens to me. Anyway, so this title of this book that I'm writing, it's a collection of linked stories, and that's something different for me. So the same characters will come up in some of the stories. Not every story is about all the characters, but the same characters will kind of wind their ways through the stories. And the stories are about a grandmother who's lived all her life in India, and in some of the stories she's young, right? But now, in the present time, she's a grandmother. Her daughter, who's born in India but moves to the US, and the granddaughter, who's always lived in the US. And it's about various things that happen in their lives. And it's really about these lives and these adventures, but also about the roles of women and how they've changed and what is possible for women now, but maybe what are the things that are still the same in the ways in which women look at the world, and especially women from my cultural background. And at the heart of this collection is it's a Bengali proverb which translates something like this. Good daughters are fortunate lamps, right? Lamps, lighting the family name. Okay? So that a lot of pressure is put on daughters to really behave in a way that will reflect well on their family. Okay, so I want to title my collection Fortunate Lamps. And then in the first story, that proverb will come up. So I think that's kind of nice. What do you think? Thank you. Thank you. So I send anything out. I edited the absolute best I know how. So I'll write it, I'll put it aside for a while to give myself some distance, then I'll edit it, and when I'm really satisfied with the editing, or when I've run out of time, it's my deadline, I'll send it to her. And then she'll send it back to me with comments, and I'll do another editing process. But I'm like an obsessive reviser, so it never ends. In fact, I have to confess to you, even as I was reading today, I was changing things as I read. And I'm like, I hope no one's reading along with me, because I just figured out a better way to say it. Okay, yes, two last questions, yes.
Thank you so much for telling us about your writing process. But I have a question. Who carries a book of Canterbury Tales?
Right, Chaucer.
And Chaucer also does the same thing that you have done. A story from each of those people who are traveling together on a boat.
Right.
And I was thinking, how much is Uma, your voice? Is she representing you in some way, or does an author always do that unconsciously, or is it deliberate?
Okay, the question has two parts, which is one is Uma's carrying Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. As some of you know, in Canterbury Tales, there's also a group of people, and each one will tell a story. And yes, I did that by design, by evil authorial design. But she's an English student, so it's okay for her to carry along Chaucer to the visa office and think that she can actually read Chaucer sitting in this visa office. So that part I designed because I knew that there would be stories that people would tell. How much of Uma is me? That depends on how well you liked Uma. Yeah, all the things you liked about Uma. All the bad parts. That's my cousin whom I hate. I put those in the text. No, really. All of the characters are imagined, and I think parts of me are in all of them. But I really have to, when I'm writing them, I have to really become them for a while. Otherwise, I can't understand them or describe them from inside. So, but that's a good question. And I saw one more. Yes.
So you commented earlier, because I have to report back to some of my students, you're going to talk about your ending.
All right, the ending. Yes, people, yes. I have realized now, there are two kinds of people in the world. One of them loves the ending of One Amazing Thing, and the other kind, yes, hate it. But that's not a problem for me, because I really wanted the ending to be something where people would have to work at it. They have to decide what happens. And for those who haven't read the book yet, I won't give it away, but it's an ambiguous ending. I'll just say it's an ambiguous ending, can be interpreted in two ways. And in this book, I mean, I generally like open-ended books because I like to kind of figure things out. And I like to think about a book after I've closed that last page. But in this book, I felt it was very crucial because what is this book about? It's about creating community. It's about creating community by sharing stories. And the ultimate act of the community creation is the reader. That's the ultimate part. The reader has to enter the story and has to end it, has to interpret the ending of the story. The reader really has to create that ending for the characters. And that's what makes the reader, invests the reader more in that book and in that community. And so you have to decide really what happens to the characters. And I think for this book, that was really important. And my belief is that depending on the kind of person you are, you will decide a certain kind of ending, right? So all those wonderful, positive, kind people in the audience, yeah. And all those dark, negative, pessimistic people in the audience, yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much. You have been such a good audience.